Nobody ever thinks about the bad girl, because the bad girls are sad. And everybody thinks about the good girl, because the good girls are glad.
Hey everybody, welcome back to A People's Historian, the show where we read about half an hour of history together. My name is Jason Kishinev, and we're going to finish up chapter 6 today of A People's History of the United States by Howard Zinn. Remember, if you enjoyed the episode, hit that like and subscribe button. Let's dig in. After Amelia Bloomer, a postmistress in a small town in New York State, developed the bloomer, women activists adopted it in place of the old whale-boned bodice, the corsets and petticoats. Elizabeth Cady Stanton, who was one of the leaders of the feminist movement in this period, told of how she first saw a cousin of hers wearing bloomers. To see my cousin with a lamp in one hand and a baby in the other walk upstairs with ease and grace, while with flowing robes I pulled myself up with difficulty, lamp and baby out of the question, readily convinced me that there was a sore need of a reform in women's dress, and I promptly donned a similar costume. Women, after becoming involved in other movements of reform, anti-slavery, temperance, dress codes, prison conditions, turned emboldened and experienced to their own situation. Angela Grimke, a southern white woman who became a fierce speaker and organizer against slavery, saw that movement leading further. Let us all first wake up the nation to lift millions of slaves of both sexes from the dust and turn them into men, and then it will be an easy matter to take millions of females from their knees and set them on their feet, or in other words, transform them from babies into women. Margaret Fuller was perhaps the most formidable intellectual among the feminists. Her starting point in Woman in the 19th Century was the understanding that there exists in the minds of men a tone of feeling toward women as toward slaves. She continued, "We would have every arbitrary barrier thrown down. We would have every path open to woman as freely as to man. And what woman needs is not as a woman to act or rule, but as a nature to grow, as an intellect to discern, as a soul to live freely and unimpeded." There was much to overcome. One of the most popular writers of the mid-19th century, the Reverend John Todd, one of his many best-selling books, gave advice to young men on the results of masturbation. The mind is greatly deteriorated. Commented on the new feminist mode of dress. Some have tried to become semi-men by putting on the bloomer dress. Let me tell you in a word why it can never be done. It is this: woman, robed and folded in her long dress, is beautiful. She walks gracefully. If she attempts to run, the charm is gone. Take off the robes and put on pants and show the limbs, and grace and mystery are all gone. In the 1830s, a pastoral letter from the General Association of Ministers of Massachusetts commanded ministers to forbid women to speak from pulpits. When she assumes the place and tone of man, we put ourselves in self-defense against her. Why the assumption that if she speaks, it's against me? It's not my assumption, ladies. But you know that. Sarah Grimke, Angelina's sister, wrote in response a series of articles, letters on the condition of women and the equality of the sexes. During the early part of my life, my lot was cast among the butterflies of the fashionable world, And of this class of women I am constrained to say, both from experience and observation, that their education is miserably deficient, that they are taught to regard marriage as the one thing needful, the only avenue to distinction. She said, I ask no favors for my sex. I surrender not our claim to equality. I surrender not our claim to equality. All I ask of our brethren is that they will take their feet from our necks and permit us to stand upright on the ground which God has designed us to occupy. To me it is perfectly clear that whatsoever it is morally right for a man to do, it is morally right for a woman to do. Sarah could write with power. Angelina was the firebrand speaker. Once she spoke 6 nights in a row at the Boston Opera House to the argument of some well-meaning fellow abolitionists that they should not advocate sexual equality because it was so outrageous to the common mind that it would hurt the campaign for the abolition of slavery. She responded, we cannot push abolitionism forward with all our might until we take up the stumbling block out of the road. If we surrender the right to speak in public this year, we may surrender the right to petition next year, and the right to write the year after, and so on. What then can woman do for the slave, when she herself is under the feet of man and shamed into silence? Angelina was the first woman in 1838 to address a committee of the Massachusetts state legislature on anti-slavery petitions. She later said, I was so near fainting under the tremendous pressure of feeling. Her talk attracted a huge crowd, and a representative from Salem proposed that a committee be appointed to examine the foundations of the State House of Massachusetts to see whether it will bear another lecture from Miss Grimke. Speaking out on other issues prepared the way for speaking on the situation of women. Dorothy Dix in 1843 addressed the legislature of Massachusetts on what she saw in the prisons and almshouses in the Boston area. I tell what I have seen, painful and shocking as the details often are. I proceed, gentlemen, briefly to call your attention to the present state of insane persons confined within this Commonwealth in cages, closets, cellars, stalls, pens, chained, naked, beaten with rods, and lashed into obedience. Francis Wright was a writer, foundation of a utopian community. Founder. Did I say foundation? Founder of a utopian community. Immigrant from Scotland in 1824, a fighter for the emancipation of slaves, for birth control and sexual freedom. Birth control in 1824? I wonder what form that took. She wanted public education for all children over 2 years of age in state-supported boarding schools. She expressed in America what the utopian socialist Charles Fourier had said in France, that the progress of civilization depended on the progress of women. In her words, I shall venture the assertion that until women assume the place in society which good sense and good feeling alike assign to them, human improvement must advance but feebly. Men will ever rise or fall to the level of the other sex. Let them not imagine that they know aught of the delights which intercourse with the other sex can give until they have felt the sympathy of mind with mind and heart with heart, until they can bring into that intercourse every affection, every talent, every confidence, every refinement, every respect, until power is annihilated on one side, fear and obedience on the other, and both restored to their birthright. Equality. Women put in enormous work in anti-slavery societies all over the country, gathering thousands of petitions to Congress. Eleanor Flexner writes in A Century of Struggle, "Today, countless file boxes in the National Archives in Washington bear witness to that anonymous and heartbreaking labor. The petitions are yellowed and frail, glued together, page on page, covered with ink blots, signed with scratchy pens, with an occasional erasure by one who fearfully thought better of so bold an act. They bear the names of women's anti-slavery societies from New England to Ohio." In the course of this work, events were set in motion that carried the movement of women for their own equality, racing alongside the movement against slavery. In 1840, a World Anti-Slavery Society convention met in London. After a fierce argument, it was voted to exclude women, but it was agreed that they could attend meetings in a curtained enclosure. The women sat in silent protest in the gallery, and William Lloyd Garrison, one abolitionist who fought for the rights of women, sat with them. It was at that time that Elizabeth Cady Stanton met Lucretia Mott and others and began to lay the plans that led to the first women's rights convention in history. It was held at Seneca Falls, New York, where Elizabeth Cady Stanton lived as a mother, a housewife, full of resentment at her condition, declaring, "A woman is a nobody. A wife is everything." She wrote later, "I now fully understood the practical difficulties most women had to contend with in the isolated household, and the impossibility of women's best development if in contact, the chief part of her life, with servants and children. The general discontent I felt with woman's portion as wife, mother, housekeeper, physician, and spiritual guide, the chaotic condition into which everything fell without her constant supervision, and the wearied, anxious look of the majority of women impressed me with the strong feeling that some active measures should be taken to remedy the wrongs of society in general, and of women in particular. My experiences at the World Anti-Slavery Convention, all I had read of the legal status of women and the oppression I saw everywhere, together swept across my soul. I could not see what to do or where to begin. My only thought was a public meeting for protest and discussion. An announcement was put in the Seneca County Courier calling for a meeting to discuss the rights of woman in 19th and 20th of July. 300 women and some men came. A declaration of principles was signed at the end of the meeting by 68 women and 32 men. It made use of the language and rhythm of the Declaration of Independence. When in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one portion of the family of man to assume among the people of the earth a position different from that they have hitherto occupied, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men and women are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The history of mankind is a history of repeated injuries and usurpations on the part of man towards woman, having in direct object the establishment of an absolute tyranny over her. To prove this, let facts be submitted to a candid world," and so forth. Then came the list of grievances. No right to vote, no right to her wages or to property, no rights in divorce cases, no equal opportunity in employment, no entrance to colleges, ending with, "He had endeavored in every way that he could to destroy her confidence in her own powers, to lessen her self-respect, and to make her willing to lead a dependent and abject life. And then a series of resolutions, including that all laws which prevent woman from occupying such a station in society as her conscience shall dictate, or which place her in a position inferior to that of man, are contrary to the great precept of nature, and therefore of no force or authority. A series of women's conventions in various parts of the country followed the one at Seneca Falls. At one of these in 1851, an aged black woman who had been born a slave in New York, tall, thin, wearing a gray dress and white turban, listened to some male ministers who had been dominating the discussion. This was Sojourner Truth. She rose to her feet and joined the indignation of her race to the indignation of her sex. That man over there says that woman needs to be helped into carriages and lifted over ditches. Nobody ever helps me into carriages or over mud puddles or gives me any best place. And ain't I a woman? Look at my arm. I have plowed and planted and gathered into barns, and no man can head me. And ain't I a woman? I would work as much and eat as much as a man when I could get it, and bear the lash as well, and ain't I a woman? I have borne 13 children, and seen 'em most all sold off to slavery, and when I cried out with my mother's grief, none but Jesus heard me. And ain't I a woman? Thus were women beginning to resist. Thus were women beginning to resist. In the 1830s and 1840s and 1850s, the attempt to keep them in their woman's sphere, they were taking part in all sorts of movements for prisoners, for the insane, for black slaves, and also for all women. In the midst of these movements, there exploded, with the force of government and the authority of money, a quest for more land, an urge for national expansion. That is a really strange way to end that chapter, but the chapter is over. I want to thank you for joining me. Join me the next time, and we will pick up whichever episode you decide to watch, actually, because it really doesn't matter. I'm reading backwards. You can read backwards with me. You can read forwards with me. It doesn't matter. So yeah, hit that like and subscribe button. Hit that notification bell so you get notified when I make a new video. And see you around. Thanks.